well. For the people who told me when I was talking about the fact that this inflation was affecting Europe on a different scale than the way that it was affecting the United States, some people told me that I didn't know what I was talking about, that I should do my research. And I tried to warn people what could happen if this was not fixed or resolved. And here we are. So we're going into this story here with Germany. It is official as of this morning. Germany is now entering a recession. Now, if we go back a couple of weeks ago, actually like a month or two ago, I told you guys that Germany actually was having an energy crisis. They couldn't afford the heat. The same thing with the UK. The UK people there couldn't afford the heat because they were depending on that pipeline from Russia for their heat. So the UK had set up facilities called warm banks where people could go to get heat that couldn't afford to have heat in their homes. I also explained to you that Germany was dealing with issues as well. This inflation has hit European countries to a different level than it has for people in the US. Now, we're still struggling, so don't get it twisted. But at the same time, it seems like they are being hit worse. So Germany has entered a recession. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at news just coming in. Germany, Europe's biggest economy, has entered recession. This after its economy shrunk by 0.3% in the first 3 months of 2023. The German Statistics Office said that the German economy declined by 0.3% after the government accounted for inflationary effects. In the last quarter of 2022, the German economy fell by 0.5%. The country is said to have entered recession after 2 successive quarters of contraction in the economy. Germany is entering recession. It will shock market analysts who believe that the country will narrowly miss it in the first quarter of 2023.
I want to chime in here for just a second and explain to you that you may be listening to this right now and you may think, well, I live in the United States, so this doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. But I do want to inform you that Germany has the 4th largest economy in the world. So it's not like they're ranked number 25th or something like that. They are a powerhouse economically. From what I remember, especially when I lived in Germany, Germany did have a good economy. So if a country like Germany can take a hit like this, I think you should still be concerned, even though you live in the United States.
Now, the German economy, which is the backbone of the European Union, is already reeling under sky-high inflation, which led to consumption declining by 1.2% compared to the last quarter. Now, for more on this, we are being joined by James Jackson, live from Berlin. James Jackson is a journalist and a political analyst. Thank you for being with us. Now, Germany has entered a recession. What will be its impact on the larger European Union and the global economy?
Also, I don't know if this is her first time on air, but I feel like she is lacking a little bit of personality. It's just something I noticed. Like, she seems more robotic, but whatever's. Here we go.
That's a really good question. I think off the bat, and thanks for having me, Alison. I think off the bat, it's worth pointing out it is recession, but it's a technical recession. So it's not a very big one. And I think things could have been much worse from the German perspective. It is a bit of a surprise, to be honest with you, that we have had a technical recession, because the growth was looking okay until if it weren't for inflation, which is also relatively low. But I think this is shows that once again shows how wrong Germany was to invest so much into Russian gas and put their energy security, and now it turns out their prosperity and their economic security relying on a dictator, Vladimir Putin.
Let's pause here for just a second. There was something that he said I do want to discuss. Notice that he said that it was a mistake for Germany to rely on Russia for gas. And that made me think about the United States because we rely on other countries for oil, right? That's why we have the relationship that we have with Saudi Arabia. We rely on other countries like China for manufacturing. Even though manufacturing is growing in the United States, it's not the way that it used to be during my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, actually. So that brings up another question. And I've said this before. Is it a mistake for the US to rely so heavily on other countries for resources? Whether we are partnering with those countries for those resources, or rather we are stealing those resources. Let's just keep it real for a second. What do we produce here in this country? Manufacturing is one of the biggest criticisms, I think, when you look at production here in the United States. There was once upon a time where a lot of the cars were made here in the United States and the parts were made here in the United States. And then someone decided to get greedy. Ford decided to get greedy. GM decided to get greedy and realized that they could get those parts actually cheaper in places, not just China, but also countries like Mexico, and lay off workers, have a smaller staff, and the CEO makes more money. So this is something that I think that we really need to pay close attention to. He said it was a mistake for Germany to rely on Russia for gas. Now, you know, there's a little bit of the kick there that he gave towards Vladimir Putin also. But I think we really need to pay attention to something like that. We don't really produce here the way that we should. Let's go on.
What that will mean is, of course, Germany exporting. I don't think actually German exports will be impacted that much because Germany gets lots of its economic strength from that. But this recession has been driven by a drop in demand. So what that effectively means is German consumers don't feel like they have money to spend. We've seen, in particular, new cars have not been sold within the German market. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be demand for German cars outside of Germany. In fact, I'm working on a story about that right now, and I can say,
in reference to car sales, new car sales are actually down in the United States as well. Just FYI, part of that is because of inflation. Part of that is also because more people are choosing not to buy cars in general. Particularly a lot of the Gen Z students that I've worked with don't want to own a car. They want to rely on public transportation, or they want to walk, or they want to bike. Bikes have really taken off here to the point where they created bike lanes in Cambridge and in Boston a couple of years ago. So that's a big part of it as well. But in reference to like new cars, like, no, like for the most part, you know, I don't think the majority of people that are working class can afford to buy a new car. I don't think the majority of people that are middle class can afford to buy a new car.
The demand is high in China, but it could be dropping. So.
Right. And James, Germany is the first major global power to enter recession. Is it a precursor to a larger financial meltdown globally?
Pay attention.
I don't think that it is. I think this is just a case, as I said, of the German economy being extremely exposed to the economic risks. Because if you look back to 2021, they were getting 55% of their gas from Russia. Obviously, that cut off massively. So the climate and economy minister, Robert Habeck from the Green Party, had to go around trying to find gas elsewhere. As I've spoken about on this show before, they've got liquid natural gas from the United States. They're getting gas from the United Arab Emirates. The transition has been managed quite well, and they have avoided catastrophe, but there has been damage done, and that's been seen in inflation, that's been seen in political damage. There's a lot of complaints right now about the energy transition and political destabilization and polarization. But I don't think we are seeing anything catastrophic. It's a technical recession, and I don't think the effects will be punched anywhere. It's quite a unique situation of Germany being a large economy that was particularly dependent on Russian gas. And of course, many countries in Europe warned them about that. But there was a strong political tradition within the German political class of seeking closeness to Russia. And of course, many of them now, including Gerhard Schröder, the former chancellor, now work for Russia. He's on the board of Gazprom. So there's a lot to criticize there in the German decisions made by the politicians, but I think the German economy is still strong. It's adapted well to having much less gas. And we are just unfortunately seeing the same impacts everywhere of inflation and a reduction in demand in household goods because they've.
What was interesting to me is that he continues to say, you know, they relied on Russia for that gas and that gas was cut off, but he doesn't tell you how it was cut off. Like he leaves that part out. Like he's just like, yeah, well, you know, Russia, they just kind of cut it off. Doesn't mention who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Notice that? Have you guys noticed that? Yeah, he doesn't mention that part. That was pretty funny to me.
More expensive.
Right. Right. And what steps do you think major economies now need to take to protect themselves from potential domino effect?
So I think in regards to inflation, that's the bigger issue here for most major economies. Germany's entered into a recession and there is low growth in other economies such as the UK. But I think some economies such as France are actually doing quite well, better than expected. And I don't think there is much risk of it catching, of the sort of fire catching and a chain reaction effect happening. But what they could do is, of course, try to boost spending, try to boost shopping and household spending, because that's what's driven the German reaction here.
How are you going to boost spending if the people don't have the money to spend?
The technical recession. So any kind of measures which could boost spending would be good, because of course with inflation people are already spending a lot without getting as much as they're used to, and so they might not want to buy what they see as luxury items such as cars, as I've said. So anything which can boost that spending, because actually household savings are not looking too bad in Europe from what I've seen.
In other words, dip into your savings account and go buy a new car. Dip into your savings account and buy luxury items. Do you see what he's putting down here? This is kind of interesting to me. This is kind of funny. Like, household savings aren't looking so bad, so dip into your savings account and buy luxury goods so it'll help out the economy. That is his recommendation there. Very interesting. What's going on, Danny? Hello. I see Danny Haifong is in the chat. So the Wall Street Journal actually posted an article about this as well. This is actually where I saw this because I'm subscribed to them. So I got the email that says Germany enters recession. And I was like, oh boy, we got to talk about this. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Wall Street Journal says Germany enters recession in blow to Europe's economy. Blow to Europe's economy. Now, doesn't that sound different from what the guy just told you in the video? You got to show different points of view here. Second straight quarter of contraction in Eurozone's largest economy might prompt greater caution by central bankers. Now, this is coming from Paul Hannon. Germany slipped into recession during the first 3 months of the year as households cut spending in response to sharply higher prices for energy and food. With Europe's largest economy now having shrunk for 2 quarters in a row, meeting the technical definition of a recession, the Eurozone as a whole may also have contracted in the first quarter. So let's go on here. The development doesn't fundamentally alter economists' views about the country's immediate prospects, and any decline in output in the broader region is likely to have been modest. Still, a recession in the Eurozone would deflate some of the optimism that has built up around the currency area's economic prospects in recent months. It could also inspire greater caution among policymakers at the European Central Bank as they prepare to raise interest rates further. So remember, we've talked about these central banks before, how they have that ability to increase the interest rates. So if that's going to happen, according to the Wall Street Journal, then that means that people in Germany are obviously going to have even less money to spend. I want to talk about tourism here for just a second. Germany is not one of these countries where there's nothing to do. They do have tourism. You can go to Berlin, you can go to Munich. Like, there's so much history in Germany. I know, I pretty much grew up there. There's so many things that you can see. And what that also tells me is that for whatever reason, could be due to the inflation. But when people start to decide where they are going to spend their money and where they are not going to spend their money, usually they will cut back on things like travel, vacations, tourism, going out to eat for dinner, things that are typically expensive that you can avoid and you don't really have to do. Buying luxury items, like he mentioned, not buying cars, not buying jewelry, like things like that. So that tells me that even the tourism part in reference to Germany obviously is not flourishing. And that's a shame. People just don't have the money to do it. People don't have the money to go on vacation to Germany and travel and visit all these sites. And there's a lot of things to see there. But this is a big sign I think people should pay attention to. It goes on to say a technical recession would be a change in the overall narrative on how resilient the Eurozone economy has been over recent years. This is coming from Bert. He's an economist at ING. Germany's statistics agency said Thursday that gross domestic product, a broad measure of the goods and services produced by an economy, was 0.3% lower in 3 months through March than in the final quarter of last year. It had previously estimated that the economy flatlined in the first quarter, having contracted by 0.5% in the final quarter of last year. The agency said a 1.2% fall in household consumption was the main reason for the contraction, as households saw their spending power eroded by a surge in food prices. What a lot of us are dealing with here in the US right now. Expensive groceries. The cost of eggs and meat. They're dealing with that as well. In March, German households were paying 21.2% more for their food purchases than a year earlier. 21.2% is a lot. Let's go on. I feel you, Ryan. I said the same thing. Ryan says this recession will be far larger than '08. The global pressure are much greater. No bailout in sight. I said the same. I agree. In months immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, economists had warned that Germany faced a high risk of sliding into recession, given its reliance on Russian supplies of natural gas. But economic data releases at the turn of the year appeared to indicate that Germany would avoid that fate. The revised figures for the first quarter confirmed that the world's fourth largest economy had succumbed to recession, but one less severe than feared when the Kremlin cut gas supplies in summer of 2022. Let's highlight this right here. You see what they're doing here? When the Kremlin cut gas supplies in summer of 2022. See how they're blaming Russia for it? No mentioning of Seymour Hersh's article. None of that. None of it. Business surveys have pointed to a return to growth in Germany during the second quarter, but the impact of higher borrowing costs and a weak expansion in many of its main export markets point to the possibility of a renewed contraction in the 3 months through September. Higher interest rates will continue to weigh on both consumption and investment, and exports may also suffer and economic weaknesses in other developed markets. That's coming from Palmas, an economist at Capital Economics, who expects decline in GDP during both the third and fourth quarters. Should the estimates for growth in other Eurozone members be unchanged, the new measure of GDP for Germany suggests the currency's area's economy as a whole contracted slightly in the first quarter. The European Union Statistics Agency currently estimates it grew at an annualized rate of 0.3% after shrinking by 0.2% in the final quarter of last year. While that change in measured output would be small, it may have an influence on the ECB's interest rate decisions over coming months. The ECB economists raised their growth forecast for this and subsequent years in March, partly in response to a picture of the Eurozone economy at the turn of the year that now appears overly optimistic. So it's here. It's already starting. Hopefully more people will cover this. I'm not telling you that you need to be terrified, but I'm also not telling you that you should ignore what's happening. Fourth largest economy in the world, entering a recession. I'm going to go to some of the comments here, and then we'll go on to the next story. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Perry Stein. Thank you for the super chat, Miss McMillan. Sabby, you're wearing that red. Love your videos. Oh, thank you so much. Red is my favorite color. I don't know if I ever told you guys that. In Deep says, Bernie's good friend Joe done fucked the world. I agree with that, In Deep. Thank you for the super chat, Elizabeth. Congrats, Sabby, on 40K. You are going places and no need to apologize for sharing your opinions. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. The Oracle says the mistake was not relying on Russia, but to rely on the United States as a geopolitical ally. Ouch. No way, says Germany had no problems with Russia until the USA told them they had problems. And Brent says CJ and Kit got themselves removed today. Unreal. I think I'll have a slice of censorship for dinner. What do you mean? I'll check that. I'll check. Hopefully you're not referring to the stream. I can check that though.